Okay, thanks for joining me. Let me turn on that recording. Thanks for joining me. We are doing a reread of yesterday's chapters that we read. I only read one chapter. No, I didn't. I read them both. I don't know how the recording turned out, so I am going to reread them. Yeah, okay. All right. I just wanted to make sure that I was rereading the right chapter. So, chapter 16, Frank T. Nibley entirely. No, I read that the other day, didn't I? There we go. Number 17, message for Homer Figg. That's where I'm at. Live in a barn and you get used to having all kinds of creatures around. Horses and cows and pigs and wild things like owls and mice and snakes. One time Harold and I watched a fat black snake swallow a little gray mouse. It was the most amazing thing because the mouse never moved or tried to get away. It was like the mouse knew it was snake food and didn't want to make trouble. That's pretty much how Mr. Willow acts with the beautiful Kate Nibley. His eyes even blink like little mouse eyes, and he shivers like a mouse whenever she says things like, "Oh, really, Webster? How simply fascinating." Or, "What's your opinion, Webster? Should I wear the pearl necklace, or do you prefer the amber?" I gotta just get these a little bit cleaner. Okay, sorry about that. Haven't known her 5 minutes and already she's Kate and he's Webster, and you'd think they've been sweethearts for years. We're sitting in a little restaurant at the steamship terminal eating butter muffins dipped in chocolate and glasses of ice cold milk. Miss Nibley is busy making Mr. Willow feel like he's the most important man who ever lived, and her brother Frank is being ever so nice to me. You say your brother was sold into the army? Extraordinary. What a terrible injustice. The whole purpose of the war is to end slavery, is it not? I didn't know what the purpose of the war is, I tell him, talking around a mouthful of muffins. I just don't want Harold getting killed is all. Of course you don't, Frank says, sipping delicately at his glass of milk. The loyal brother. How touching. And you say this enterprise, this urgent journey to free your brother is being financed by Jebediah Brewster? Of the famous Brewster mines? I didn't say no such thing, but Mr. Willow did, blurting out all over private business the first time Miss Nibley asked how Mr. Brewster is testing his character by sending him as my guardian, and how he has letters of introduction to very important people, and how he's been instructed to purchase Harold's release if it comes to that. He does everything but show her the money entrusted to him by Mr. Brewster, and that's only because I jump on his shoe. Homer, what has gotten into you? He asks, rubbing his skinny foot. Time we get on the ship, Mr. Willow. There's no hurry, says Frank Nibley, showing me his teeth. No hurry at all. But the other passengers are saying their goodbyes and starting to board the steamship Orion, and the stewards are loading up the trunks and baggage, and clouds of smoke are coming out of the smokestack. Mr. Willow finally notices what's happening and jumps up like somebody stuck him with a darning needle. The boy is right, he blurts. We must go. Can't miss the ship. When Mr. Willow makes it clear we really do have to board, I figure that will be the end of it, because something tells me the Nibleys don't really have tickets for the steamship, but want to trick us into missing the boat so they can figure out how to fool Mr. Willow into giving them the money. They're after the money. I know it, and Frank knows it, and Kate knows it. The only one who doesn't know what's really going on is poor Mr. Willow. I grab him by the cuff and drag him to the gangway into the crowd of passengers who are boarding. He keeps looking back at Miss Nibley, and she keeps batting her eyelashes, but finally we're at the top of the gangway, and a man is asking for our tickets. Tickets? Tickets? Says Mr. Willow, looking confused. He pats his pockets and my heart sinks. But then he finds the envelope and hands over the tickets, and the man is shooing us aboard, telling us to make way for the other passengers. My idea is to hurry along to the cabins, but Mr. Willow turns back to the rail, looking for Miss Nibley in the crowd below. Frank and Kate are nowhere to be seen. Where could she have gone? Mr. Willow wants to know. It's on my tongue to say they're off looking for another sucker, but the poor man looks so hurt I decide to keep my mouth shut. If the cabins on the steamship Orion were any smaller, they'd be cages, and me and Mr. Willow would be clucking like chickens. There's barely room to open the door, and the bunks are so short and narrow that Mr. Willow has to practically fold himself in half before he can lie down. It's not so bad for me. I mostly fit, and from the top bunk, I can see out the little window. I lie there and watch the light fade from the sky until the stars come out. We could walk the promenade deck like most of the other passengers are doing, or visit the dining room, or maybe even explore the steam engines or tour the wheelhouse. But Mr. Willow doesn't want to leave the cabin. I never seen a man go so lovesick. But there's no doubt about what's going wrong with Webster Willow. He's pining for Kate Nibley. A few hours ago, he never knew she existed, and now he can't live without her. You need to see a doctor, I advise. Maybe get some pills or some leeches to draw away the sick blood. Shut up, Homer. See? If you were feeling well, you'd never tell anyone to shut up. You're much too polite. Go away and leave me alone. Can't, I say from my perch on the top bunk. You're my guardian. If I was to fall off the ship or jump into the boiler, Mr. Brewster would hold you responsible, and you'd never get your congregation. Jump off the ship for all I care, he says, his voice muffled by the pillow he's hugging to his face. You never liked her, he wails. It's all your fault. There's such a bunch of things I could tell him if only he'd listen. How it's plain as the long, skinny nose on his face that Miss Nibley doesn't really care about him, but only about the money. How one liar can always recognize another, and I right away recognized two of them, and Frank and Kate Nibley. From the moment she pretended to fall into Mr. Willow's arms. How some folks are just naturally decent and truthful, like Harold and Mr. Willow, and others are always scheming and taking advantage. I could tell him all these things, but Mr. Willow jams the pillow over his head, and so I'm left talking to myself and listening to the steady throb of the great steam engine and feeling the steady whoosh of water running by the hull. Whoosh, 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 like the ocean is telling me a story, but I can't hear it until I'm sound asleep. When the knock comes on the cabin door, I wake up so fast I bump my head on the ceiling. Homer Figg! Message for Homer Figg! Mr. Willow is snoring like a sawmill, so it's up to me to jump down from the bunk and open the cabin door. A ship steward stands in the passageway. He's wearing a funny little hat that buckles under his chin and a smart uniform with gold stripes running down his trousers, and tight little shoes polished like black mirrors, and clean white gloves on his elegant little hands. His little eyes are as cold as chips of black ice. Homer Figg? Yes, sir, that's me. The captain has requested your presence, he announces, sounding very full of himself. Follow me, please. If the captain wants to see me, I must have done something wrong, but I can't for the life of me think what that could be, since so far I've been in the cabin the whole trip looking out for poor Mr. Willow. Still, when the captain of a steamship gives an order, you'd best comply. So I tuck in my shirt and follow the steward as he marches smartly through the dim passageway and out to the open deck where the smell of salt and sea wakes me up all the way. The steward gives me a stern look, then takes a thick brass key from his pocket and locks the passenger door behind us. Where's the captain? I asked. In his cabin, fast asleep, the steward says, pocketing the key. He touches his hand to his little hat and then slips away into the darkness so fast I don't have time to follow. It comes to me that the captain never wanted to see me. Probably he's never even heard of Homer Figg, and that someone has paid the steward to get me out of the cabin and lock the door behind me. I run along the deck looking for another door, but they all seem to be locked from the outside. I start banging on the walls and shouting for Mr. Willow, and finally one of the doors flies open, and an old man in a nightshirt wants to know why in the name of thunder I'm making such a ruckus. Thanks, much obliged, I say, and scoot past him into the passageway on a dead run for our cabin before it's too late. But when I get there, Mr. Frank Nibley is already leaning against the wall and studying his fingernails. He gives me a sly little smile and says, "Good evening, Homer. Taking the night air?" "Where's Mr. Willow?" I demand. "What have you done to him?" "Mr. Willow is fine," he says. "Mr. Willow is dandy." Before I can get around him, the cabin door swings open and out steps the Reverend Webster B. Willow in his best frock coat and Kate Nibley draped on his arm. "Mr. Willow, are you okay? Have you still got the money?" The clergyman has this goofy look on his face, like he's not sure whether he's in this world or the next. But wherever he is, he's happy to be there. Like he's been hit on the head with a wooden mallet and likes it. "The most amazing thing has happened," he announces, patting his clever hands. "I am to be married. Miss Nibley and I are engaged to be married." Chapter 18. The Smell of Pigs. What happened is Miss Nibley kissed Mr. Willow, and he kissed her back, and now he thinks he's obliged to marry her as a matter of honor. "I wouldn't expect you to understand such a thing," he says loftily, his eyes shining like little brown pebbles. "What would an orphan boy know of honor?" Orphan boy. That's what Frank Nibley called me, and now he's got Mr. Willow saying it too. Come to think of it, the clergyman hasn't used his own words since he's come under the spell of Kate the Beautiful. It's like the storybooks where the princess kisses a frog and it turns into a prince, except Mr. Willow has turned into something even dumber than a frog. More like a skinny worm about to be breakfast for a really smart robin. There's no use talking because he only hears what he wants to hear, but that don't stop me speaking my mind on the subject. "You think Mr. Brewster would approve?" I asked him, pacing around the cabin. "He sends you to help me and you get married instead? Have you seen the way her brother looks at your wallet like a fox deciding which chicken to eat? That's how he looks." "Darling Kate always wanted to be a minister's wife," he says dreamily. "It was love at first sight." "It was love at first sight, all right. They saw you coming a mile away, said to each other, 'That looks as dumb as a sack of rocks. Let's see what he's got in his pockets.' Mr. Willow don't put his finger in his ears, but he might as well for all the good it's doing. 'We'll settle in New York City, close to her family,' he says, 'and I shall be pastor of Park Avenue.' Park Avenue is where the rich folk live, Mr. Willow. Even I heard of that." "Indeed, indeed. For your information, the Nibleys are very wealthy. Dear Frank handles all the finances. Dear Frank wants to handle our finances, Mr. Willow. You can't let him take the money. We need to get Harold back." He ignores me and keeps right on talking his dreamy talk about getting married. The sooner, the better. "I will cable Mr. Brewster from New York and inform him of the happy news," he says, looking off into the distance as if spotting a lovely rainbow. "He will give me his blessing, I'm sure. Jebediah has been helpful and generous, but the Nibleys are, well, they're the Nibleys." I never heard of the Nibley family, but it turns out Mr. Willow knows they're high up in New York society, and it comes to me that it isn't only her beautiful self he loves, but the name attached. It makes me think maybe I'm wrong somehow, because what would a family like that want with a skinny farm boy in a frayed jacket, except if it really is true love? "We're soulmates," he mutters to himself. "Fate brought us together. Dear Kate has been waiting for me all her life. She knew it the moment she looked into my eyes." That does it. It can't be true love. Mr. Willow has eyes like sick kitten. You might love a sick kitten, but you don't marry it. You keep it as a pet. I've got an idea, I tell him, tugging at his sleeve. Give me the money. I'll keep it safe until we get to New York. Mr. Willow looks at me like I crawled out from under a rock. Trust the money to a poor orphan boy, he asks, focusing on me like I just came to his attention. Certainly not. And for that matter, how do you even know you even have a brother? Has anyone seen this so-called brother? Maybe you've been scheming all along to defraud Mr. Brewster. Anything is possible with an orphan boy. That shuts my mouth. Here I began feeling sorry for my poor Mr. Willow, that he's being made a fool of, and all along he's never trusted me. Or maybe it's an idea Frank Nibley put into his empty head. Doesn't matter how it got there. That scares me is that other folk will believe it too. Miss Nibley pretends to be nice about it, but makes it clear that orphan boys are not invited to society weddings. Poor boy, you have the attitude of a ruffian, she says, sniffing daintily. I'm sure it's not your fault, considering your upbringing. But there it is. We can't have ruffians. Ruffians will not be allowed. Ruffians will not be tolerated. So I'm not just an orphan boy, which is bad enough. I'm a ruffian orphan boy that can't be invited to weddings or allowed to stay in the cabin when weddings are being planned. Frank calls in the steward, the one with the funny little hat and the ice chip eyes, and tells him to remove me from the premises. The boy will be happier in steerage, Frank says, among his own kind. The steward grabs hold of my collar. I'll tell the captain, I shout, threatening to expose their evil plan. I'll tell him how you tricked Mr. Willow and that you're both liars. Kate sighs and rolls her eyes. What the captain may or may not think is no concern of ours. We have no need of the captain. My brother is duly licensed justice of the peace. He shall marry us. Isn't that right, Frank? Frank smiles and consults his pocket watch. The hour is upon us, Mr. Willow. Are you ready to tie the knot? I saw a man in Pine Swamp once who had been kicked in the head by a horse and nearly died. He had a look about him like he could see all the way to heaven and didn't care about this world no more. That's how Mr. Willow looks when he takes Kate's hand. You're making a terrible mistake. But the sneering steward clamps a hand across my mouth and yanks me out of the cabin and shuts the door behind us. Do you want to live? The steward hisses, trotting me along the passageway. If you want to live, shut your filthy little mouth. That's when I bite him on the hand as hard as I can. The steward yelps and drops me, and then I'm running full steam for the exit. Rotten brat, he shrieks, reaching out to grab me. I have gotten away for sure, except the slippery deck. I'm coming around the corner, heading for the door to the deck, when I hit a waxy spot and crash headfirst into an iron pipe. The last thing I remember, the pipe coming at me like a very big gray bullet, and then nothing but darkness and the smell of pigs. Okay, so I'm going to take a little break, and then we will do 2 more chapters. That was just a rebroadcasting of yesterday because we didn't get through yesterday because I had some bad connection. So chapter 19 and chapter 20, The Amazing Pig Boy. Coming up, give me a 5-minute break, and I'm going to schedule the broadcast right now. Thanks.